Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. My name is Brian Sonnenstein, one of the co-founders of Shadowproof, joined here with my other co-founder, Kevin Gosztola, who's been up since the crack of dawn reporting on today's proceedings in the extradition hearing, the trial portion for Julian Assange. Kevin, why don't you run us through what happened today?
Yeah, so it was day 6, and pleased to say that we did not have the kind of technical difficulties that we had endured yesterday, which made it impossible to finish and wrap up Eric Lewis's testimony. But we started in the morning with Eric Lewis, who, for those who don't know what happened yesterday, he's a U.S. lawyer who has some experience representing international detainees, international prisoners. He's represented individuals accused of terrorism offenses. One of them was last name Gosztola, who was accused of involvement in the Benghazi attacks back in 2012. So he's somebody who's familiar with the way the federal government might go about pursuing these cases. And so he took the stand to complete his cross-examination with James Lewis, the prosecutor, who had more lines of questioning to pursue with him. And some of it had to do with the way he believes this case would unfold and why he believes the Obama administration didn't prosecute Julian Assange. And there was even an explicit section where the First Amendment was addressed, and a quote that I'll probably have ringing in my head for the next few days is, I challenge you to provide to this court one single precedent that says publishers cannot be prosecuted, which was sort of like bizarre to me, but I understand exactly where it's coming from because it represents the aggressive nature of what the U.S. government is doing in this case. To me, it seems like the fact that there is no Supreme Court precedent for prosecuting journalists should be taken as a positive. I view that as like a protection against any attacks on press freedom in the United States. I think it makes the First Amendment stronger. But for James Lewis, the way he was speaking about it, he seems to believe it's like a dare. There isn't anything to stop me from prosecuting a journalist. So let's bring Julian Assange to the U.S. and see if we could complete this and make it happen. So Eric Lewis was on the stand. He completed his cross-examination. There wasn't too much more that came out. I'd say that even though there was a lot left, there was at least an hour or more testimony that was left to be taken from Eric Lewis. Even though that was the case, I think that the prosecution had their better testimony yesterday. We did get back on the Babar Ahmed decision in the European Court of Human Rights, which, if you go to Shadowproof, I have a full report on how I think that that's favorable to the government, and to the extent that it downplayed the abusive nature of supermax prisons. And so I have that out there if you would like to get some more background information on what we're referring to. Certainly, this isn't something that most people in the United States would be aware of as far as these extradition cases. These were defendants that were accused of largely terrorism offenses, and a few of them alleged that they had mental illnesses, and the court still went ahead and approved their extradition. And then, Eric Lewis raised the fact that there have been these studies that have been undertaken since that happened back in 2012, and that there's largely much more information. We've had many more studies conducted on the impact of solitary confinement on people's psychiatric well-being while they're in these kinds of conditions. And also the United Nations in this time has become much more aggressive in challenging this kind of cruel and inhuman treatment by governments. So we don't know how that might factor in if the Julian Assange case was before the European Court of Human Rights this round. So we had this, and then when we got to the part where the defense team's able to come on and do redirect and ask the witness some more questions to flesh out more of the case, and to challenge some of what the prosecution was attempting to do with their questions, we got on the sentencing. And this was I think this was an important thing. I'll probably be the focus of my written report for today, which was, what kind of a sentence could we expect Julian Assange to get? We've had a vague number thrown out of potentially a maximum of 175 years. And how do we get to that? And so Eric Lewis was on the stand, sharing his understanding of the way federal sentencing guidelines are applied. And he went through several of the enhancements that could be applied to Julian Assange to increase the sentence that would be received, and walked through several different things that could be done. For example, one of the things that was highlighted was the fact that someone having a special skill, and that special skill, if it was used to commit the crime, could be added as an enhancement to target that person. And so his technical proficiency and the way that he was able to make these publications, the way he went about it, could become something that they criminalize. And then there's also the aspect that in the indictment, we now mention a teenager, anyone under 18 who was involved in the conspiracy. That might be seen as exploitative of a minor. So maybe that would be aggravating. They would add that to the sentence as an enhancement. These disclosures we're seeing that the government argues that there were informants that were revealed and exposed to harm, to the extent that they wanted to say that government employees who worked at these U.S. embassies were exposed to harm. Then they could maybe add that in on sentencing and make that an enhancement, and that could increase the time. So I think, we got up to something about somewhere around 30 to 40 years, I think, of time that, he could find himself being sentenced to prison if he was convicted of all the offenses, and you had all of these kinds of enhancements that might be added if a judge were to approve them. And so that was a significant part of this, and it might have actually been longer, but I'll be more specific and clear in my report at Shadowproof. So after we had the testimony from Eric Lewis, then we had Thomas Durkin come to take the stand. And I'd say this was an accomplishment for the proceedings because we actually got to a second witness today. Our pace got a little bit more quicker. So he was on the stand, and he is a U.S. attorney. He's actually based in Illinois and around the Chicago area where I am based. I got to watch him do work in a case that involves three activists who were accused of material support for terrorism, or they were charged under a state terrorism law here in Illinois. It was called the NATO 3 case. So anyways, he got some really good experience. He's represented people who were accused of serious national security offenses. And he was a defense person that was called to give his testimony, and the defense walked him through some of the ways that, and what they focused on with him was what would happen is with discovery material. When you are a defendant, there's an opportunity for your defense attorneys to collect evidence. You ask for the government to provide material that can help you put together your case. They need to make it available to you so you can put on your best defense. But if it's classified, then what Tom Durkin said is, I can't really share that information with the person I'm representing because they don't have a security clearance and they're not allowed to see this information. And so that was something that was a focus of the initial part of this testimony. And then it came back, and Thomas Durkin was asked questions by the prosecutor. They went through this. Of course, the way the prosecutor dealt with the concerns that he had about the classified information was to say, well, aren't all of these documents that are already out there, aren't they in the public domain because WikiLeaks published them? So wouldn't you just be talking about this material? But I think that mistakes the fact that there's a huge universe of information that deals with what happened when these were published. You have to be able to prove to some degree, whether this did grave damage or harm to the United States, whether he had reason to believe, all of these different aspects of the Espionage Act offenses. Well, probably materials that are in the U.S. government's possession are classified, and in order to understand those materials, if Julian Assange can't see what the government really thought about all of these materials, then it's going to be hard to put on the kind of defense that we've seen historically in these cases. Oh, I'll backtrack and say that Jeffrey Sterling's case came up, Terry Albury's case came up, and Reality Winner's case came up as examples that the prosecutor was raising when they were talking to Eric Lewis. And it's my view that those cases are not really comparable to Julian Assange's case, simply because, well, for one, they involve sources. Julian Assange is not the source. But two, just the fact that I think that when you look at this case, it's far more complex. It involves a lot more material, and just the allegations and what they're claiming Julian Assange did seems to me to be different than just some of these pure Espionage Act cases that were just multiple charges that were going after the simple act of providing some classified information to a journalist. It's there's a lot more happening in this case, so I don't think it's just a straight cookie cutter kind of a comparison that you can draw between the two to say that then Julian Assange should be treated, because they were invoking these cases because all three of those individuals have received anywhere from around 5 to 6 years or less. It's interesting. They don't really talk about what happened to Chelsea Manning in the military context, even though that could be relevant. And all of these individuals who were charged under the Espionage Act had shorter sentences. But I don't know. I think like the scale of impact that the U.S. government would claim is probably much less for these three people who were convicted of leaking than it is for Julian Assange, who I think there's a large amount of allegations and claims on the part of the U.S. government. I mean, I can't see them going through all of this and bringing him to the United States and settling for 5 to 6 years in a federal prison. It just doesn't seem like it would be worth it. And so if that's all they're going to get out of it, I don't know why they're spending all of these resources to try to extradite him, other than the fact that, well, I suppose it does tie him up and make it impossible for him to be an editor-in-chief of the WikiLeaks organization. But still, I would think if you've got the evidence to do it, and I think the prosecutors can embellish it and push, and certainly the defense believes that they can push, then I would think that, if you're going to be honest, the prosecutor, it hasn't really been honest, but if you're being honest, we're looking at a case that's probably somewhere around 15 to 20 years at least, if not much, much more, that would realistically be handed down against Julian if he was convicted of these offenses. So both of these witnesses were on the stand to walk through some of these issues. We again revisited the issue of the public reporting that was out there from the New York Times and the Washington Post about Barack Obama declining to prosecute. Once again, I emphasize that this is just fact. It is a fact that Barack Obama's administration did not indict Julian Assange. It is a fact that Donald Trump's administration indicted Julian Assange. Now, obviously, that's a problem for the prosecutor because it shows that there's a political decision involved here. But, I'm not going to deny reality just because Barack Obama has a poor record when it came to press freedom and the war on whistleblowers. The right choice was ultimately made. And it's very clear that might be something that plays a big part in saving Julian Assange from extradition.
Thank you, Kevin. Unless you had any other reflections on today, I was wondering if you could tell us about some of the great witnesses it looks like we're poised to have tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. So as we wrap up here for today's court report, tomorrow we expect to hear from Daniel Ellsberg, Pentagon Papers whistleblower, and they have to work out the time zone difference. As if he was going to join in the morning, he'd be getting up even earlier than me. In fact, he may not even be going to bed. He'd be joining us maybe from like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning in the Pacific time zone. So they're going to have him come later in the afternoon. I don't know how long. It's not been said how much time they want to spend with him, but I can't imagine the prosecutors want to spend too much time with him. He's also, he's like 87, 88 years old, and so I don't know how much, how good of a look it would be if the prosecutor practiced his style on Daniel Ellsberg, and he was unable to understand what the prosecutor was doing. It might start to look a little bit like elder abuse, is my suggestion. So then early in the morning, when we first start at 10 o'clock, we're going to have John Getz, who was an investigative journalist with Der Spiegel, and he worked on the publications. I was at the media organization when they were handling the war log materials, I believe, as well as the U.S. state embassy cables. So he's got a fair bit of knowledge about the editorial process that WikiLeaks had, the way they handled security for the materials. So all of this evidence that is presented by the defense will go towards undermining these claims that WikiLeaks isn't journalism, and also that they were just endangering lives and that they had no consideration for the people who would be harmed by publishing the materials. So this will be a good day. I think that as far as some of the days that we've had so far, I'm not saying that this was a lightweight day. I'm not saying that this isn't important evidence, but at least with John Getz, even though, I actually think he's more consequential for the defense than Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg is a source who can talk about the way in which the government went after the journalists that he passed information on to, and he can draw analogies and comparisons between what he went through and what's happening today. But that might be just a little bit too historical and possibly abstract for the court. But what isn't abstract is the specifics that John Getz will be able to share from his experience at Der Spiegel working with Julian Assange, which we are, unfortunately, we don't see anybody from The Guardian stepping up, or we don't see anybody from the New York Times stepping up to volunteer to help Julian Assange, even though the editorial boards have spoken out on his behalf. So these couple of journalists, and this isn't the only journalist we'll be hearing from during the extradition trial, but this person is I think very crucial because he was working as a media partner with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks.
Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate your reporting today. I don't know if you had any final thoughts before we wrap up, but I just wanted to remind people to make sure that you're following Kevin on Twitter every morning. That's where he's doing his live tweeting of the proceedings. You should also check out Shadowproof Daily for his reports. And you can also subscribe to his newsletter, dissenter.substack.com, which is also will send out the reports daily and is a great way to support Kevin's work. You could also go over to shadowproof.com/donate, chip in, even just a few dollars if you're able to give. It helps. It helps us compensate Kevin for all this labor that he is going to be doing for the next few weeks, like it or not, Kevin. I just appreciate everyone who's tuning in and everybody who has given and shared and said nice things on social media. I also just wanted to say thank you from the bottom of our hearts. This is very difficult work. It's a lot of work. It's work that a lot of other journalists and outlets either aren't doing or don't have sort of the experience that Kevin has to do it well. So it means a lot to have the support. So we really appreciate it. Any final words there, Kev?
Well, just quickly, anyone who wants to get my written reports daily can go to dissenter.substack.com. It's a newsletter. After we're done with the court proceedings, it'll be a paid newsletter. But while we're doing this crucial reporting, I've opened it up to anyone who's on the email list to be getting these daily. And then, so if you would like to get these, you can go to dissenter.substack.com. And that just gives you, extra detail beyond what we might be able to put out in our live video reports, and also beyond what are in the live Twitter threads.
Thank you. All right. We will talk to everyone tomorrow after the court proceedings. I hope you all have a great day. Take care.